Greetings, class. In this installment, we're going to talk about how does power influence conflict. And first thing I have to do is give some sort of definition of power. And there's lots of different ways to think about it. But for the terms of conflict that we're going to use, power is the ability to get others to act in accordance with your will. I realize that might sound like some jargony international relations kind of terminology, but it really is when you can get somebody to do what you want them to do, whether or not they want to. I mean, that's what power is. You can force your way, and so power can influence conflict in a number of different ways. In some cases, and I think the stuff that I think we should all be on guard for the most, right? You should exercise serious caution to avoid using power in ways that is coercive. So coercion is when you make somebody do something that they don't want to do. So power is to get somebody to do what you want them to do. But if you're getting them to do something that you want them to do that actually goes against what they desire for themselves, that's coercive. Sometimes, I mean, there's no way around it. People are coercive, sometimes with more nefarious intentions and purposes. And so I exercise, concern about that. Contracts can be coercive, right? There are predatory lenders, for example. This would be an example of a coercive practice where sometimes people take out loans with horrendous interest rates on the basis that they really do feel as though they need the money. And at the same time, they might not really fully be aware of. But in other cases, they might be fully aware of the truly dangerous kind of impact of reaching such an agreement. I say be careful. Again, not because it's illegal. Sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's not. But people should always follow the law. But yeah, power is not illegal for sure. And some coercion may not be as bad as maximal coercion, right? We wouldn't say putting a gun to somebody's head is a good strategy for negotiation, but people do frequently use violence, threats, intimidation, and so forth to try to pursue outcomes that they see as desirable. And this type of thinking, like just to put it in the simplest terms, is that the ends justify the means. I would caution against an idea that it's okay to be coercive if you're able to minimize your legal risk while pursuing a stronger path to desired outcomes. So coercion can be one of the worst details that there is with power. And it's probably not the most common, to be perfectly honest. But so the details about power are things like you do have an ability to influence someone. And the ability to be able to tell them what's going to happen or dictate a process is the part that I think we should put in the most kind of normalized terms. Managers get to tell employees, what their work assignments are going to be, whether or not the employees feel like that's the activity that they would like to be engaged in on that day, or that's the person that they would like to work with, or whatever that might be. Sometimes, part of like work agreements really does stipulate that, that people don't have control over being able to decide what they're going to do at work. And the thing about it is that one of the responses that management might have is, like this kind of coercive strategy. If you don't like it, then leave. There are costs to both sides of such strategies. And again, that's part of the reason that I'm not going to ever encourage people to be coercive. That doesn't mean that people necessarily have to back down. But, if your strategy is like, do what I say or leave, that could contribute to high turnover and so forth in a certain kind of workplace environment. Some industries have built-in turnover rates, so that they might not be as afraid of that. But other industries, the cost of training a replacement is really prohibitive. So if you are potentially losing employees by demanding things off of them that would serve the company's interests, but are actually causing them to turn over, you could be undermining the pursuit of the company's bottom line in virtue of basically using power to force people to act in ways that's in accordance with your will, but which they decide they don't want to do. They'd rather work for somebody else. Examples of that might be ways that workplaces can maybe demand people to work overtime, or work on weekends, or work on scheduled days off, or stuff like that, where a conversation and finding out like if the person's available or looking for alternative solutions might actually work out a lot better for both parties involved. I mean, I'm an example of this. Sometimes I schedule things, and if somebody said, about like that time off that you had, you're not going to be able to have it. Well, if I've already bought the plane tickets, there's a good chance that I'm not planning on not taking that trip. And that happened to me at a workplace before. I bought my tickets to go on a trip so that I could visit a good friend for New Year's Eve. The job was delivering pizzas. I didn't really feel like I needed to, cancel my trip. I'd already paid for the tickets just because the manager said nobody was getting New Year's off. And actually, it didn't work out as being like really problematic so much as I was like, I already bought plane tickets, and the manager was like, you should have talked to me about it first. And I was like, honestly, I would have, but if I waited, then I was going to miss out on the prize. So I didn't feel like I had time for it. But the other part was, I wasn't sure that I was going to keep that job for minimum wage if it was going to demand things like I was going to have to cancel vacations. And I felt like it was reasonable, but it was also my selfish interest. New Year's Eve is one of those nights where nobody gets the day off because lots of people order pizza and they want to make sure that they have a full time. Anyway, if they would have said, sorry, if you don't work, you're getting fired, I would have gotten fired, and then they would have lost a good employee, an otherwise good employee, right? So they would have had to have, make an assessment about, what their bottom line is or how much they were willing to impact their bottom line. If they decided that actually it was going to be bad for workplace morale to have a person go on vacation, despite the fact that an announcement was made that nobody gets the night off, then I could see where, strategically they might have seen reason to go in the other direction. Anyway, when we look at a calculus of power, that is what we're talking about. The ability for somebody to dictate the terms of process, dictate the terms of the agreement, dictate the terms of outcomes or possible outcomes. I mean, you can never guarantee that another person's going to act in accordance with your will. But if you have power, then you have a lot of leverage in terms of being able to impose upon that other what's going to happen or what's not going to happen, right? Student-teacher relationships have lots of this power as well. Students are protected from teachers and at the level that teachers aren't able to exploit or take advantage of students in ways that go beyond codes of conduct, right? Like there's a student code of conduct, an employee code of conduct. If people start, taking advantage of their power, which does happen, and it's unfortunate. You hate to hear about anybody abusing their position. And this is, not just in higher education. It happens everywhere. I mean, it's tragic. But that is an abuse of power. But the use of power is what happens that teachers, instructors, professors assign homework, assign tests, assign activities that will be graded. And they get to dictate a whole lot about what's going to happen. And maybe somebody doesn't feel like that they want to write a 6-page paper, but maybe their instructor thinks that 6 pages is the minimum standard for providing evidence of learning. So the syllabus is the contract. Student gets a chance to see what's being expected of them. If they don't want to live up to these terms, then they shouldn't take the class, right? Like they have their power, they get to empower themselves to take the classes from the instructors that they want. But conversely, instructors don't have the power to change assignments once they've said that this is what's going to happen. You can't start a class with a certain set of expectations on how things are going to be graded, and then down the line have an instructor decide, you know what, actually I'm not making you guys work hard enough. It just doesn't work that way. Right? So, but these are the parameters that we operate within. Instructors do the grading. There's a lot of power involved with that. It suggests and dictates what the expectations for workload, what assignments will be completed, what topics will be covered, all of that stuff. And that's done under the pretext of the person's in power, but also under the pretext of that they have authority over what's being covered, that they're the ones that know the material, know how to present it, and how to assess the achievement or the level of achievement of students such that they're graded in the process. So some power is justified. Some power, it's part of life. The people who know more, the people who have more power, aren't necessarily the same. Sometimes students know more about a subject than the person who's teaching it, right? Like, so there's no guarantee that it's necessarily justified. But at the same time, power does exist, and it does exist in a variety of different ways. Sometimes people have the ability to make others do what they want. Sometimes people find themselves in conflict because they resist the authority or the power of others. And so this gets to be really complex. How we strategize in negotiation when we have the power is different than how we strategize in negotiation when we don't have the power, and so on and so forth. But I guess the last thing, and just to remind people, is that frequently the person who has the power doesn't realize that they have the power. It's the person who doesn't have the power that realizes that they're up against, the obstacle. And so steps can be made to try to create or remedy the feelings of inequality so that the power dynamic isn't preventing the opportunity for people to reach mutually satisfying outcomes, which tends to be the way that I advocate for the strongest sense of win-win outcomes, although it's not always possible. Sometimes the thing that you have to do with power is realize that you're not going to be able to get what you want, and sometimes the best thing to do is, if somebody's being abusive, is to walk away or to find a safe space so that you can proceed in a way that actually is empowering and satisfying, in particular with the process. Process satisfaction is very difficult to achieve when somebody has the power and is now dictating a process. And if you're not comfortable with that, that's something to be very on guard for. If you have to proceed because you don't have other opportunities or pathways to success, and there's a substantive concern, that's important to keep in mind. Like, walking away isn't always an option, but whenever walking away is an option, or the moment that you determine that there is an alternative pathway to success, frequently going away from a person who's being exploitive or abusive is going to be something that I would definitely encourage. Anyway, see you in the next one.